According to Wikipedia, the theory of evolution assumes a continuous process consisting of changes in species traits across successive generations as a result of the elimination, through natural or artificial selection, of some individuals from the current population. Supporters of the theory of evolution believe that the entire process of the origin of the world and life occurred without the intervention of any external intelligence, and that the direction and development of the universe, from a state in which the spontaneous emergence of life from non-living matter became possible, through the further development of life into complex beings possessing conscious personality, is an inherent property of matter that emerged spontaneously from nothing. No matter how absurd it may sound, on the key issue of the source of origin of this brilliantly developing world, and thus also the source of the origin of life, the theory of evolution has absolutely nothing to say. And the evolutionary hypotheses themselves resemble a kind of fortune-telling from coffee grounds, even though an entire statistical apparatus has been employed for this purpose, focused mainly on the alleged randomness of the development of life rather than on facts, that is, on phenomena supposedly produced by these evolutionary processes, which we can observe, demonstrate, and reproduce here and now, rather than in a million years or far away on a hypothetical planet, at the other end of the universe, entirely beyond credible exploration. Consideration of the problem of evolution in the origin of complex life is a vast topic, which I will leave for a separate film or a series of films. Here, I will limit myself to the definition of a phylogenetic tree promoted by evolutionists. In this presentation, I will also not discuss methods for constructing phylogenetic trees due to the need to introduce a complex mathematical framework. And the purpose of this film is not to overwhelm the audience with formulas and derivations, which I intend to address on another occasion. So, what is an evolutionary phylogenetic tree? According to a definition retrieved by AI, it is a graphical diagram that presents evolutionary relationships between different groups of organisms, illustrating their relatedness and evolutionary history. This tree is a visualization of hypotheses about evolution, where the branching pattern reflects how species or other groups are thought to have evolved from common ancestors. In other words, through the mechanism of natural selection, that is, through the brutal elimination of the weaker, we are to obtain all complex life on Earth from a single cell. In the real world that we observe, such a process can currently explain only certain limited types of small-scale adaptive changes. However, it does not at all explain the origin of the actual complexity of life. What a phylogenetic tree based on genetic code similarities actually shows? It shows the current state of differences and, in fact, tells us nothing about history of the origin and changes of life. To believe in the evolutionary process of slow historical changes in the development of life on Earth, which is unobservable today, we must assume, first of all, that life originated from a single primitive form and then developed further through the process of natural selection as observed today, even though the observable effects of such selection today yield very limited results. Is there, however, another explanation for the similarities and differences in the genetic code that allows for the construction of such a tree of relationships? Of course, there is. Although the explanation may turn out to be much more complex, it is certainly more credible than the one proposed by evolutionists. Most importantly, it is an explanation that does not require the absurd idea of the world merging from nothing, which in a goal-directed yet random manner produces all successive layers of the environment necessary for spontaneous emergence, development and maintenance of extraordinarily complex life. I apologize, but I simply cannot continue practicing such an absurd science, and I propose the theory of intelligent design based on information derived directly from the Bible. I therefore propose a new, modified, and significantly broader definition of the phylogenetic tree based on intelligent design. Of course, the evolutionary concept of the origin of complex life can also be considered in terms of design. After all, the genetic algorithm proposed by evolutionists intended to create life from the first cell can certainly be considered in terms of purpose, design, and the learning program. Thus, we can modify the definition of the phylogenetic tree as follows. A phylogenetic tree is a graphical diagram depicting design-based relationships among different groups of organisms, illustrating their similarities, origins, and history of creation. This tree is a visualization of hypotheses regarding intelligent design, where the branching pattern reflects the way species or other groups may have been created from common design patterns. In other words, we allow for the possibility of life developing from the common primitive ancestor. I emphasize that this refers to the evolutionary process unobservable today, not mentioning the origin of life from non-living matter, while also allowing for the possibility of using a common design pattern in an intellectual, creative process. According to the extended definition of a phylogenetic tree, trees can originate from a pattern or a less complex product, through patterns or products of greater complexity, up to more complex products that represent the goal of the design. Evolutionary trees are precisely this type of phylogenetic trees. The slide shows an example of a design tree which could represent an evolutionary phylogenetic tree, illustrating the modernization process of a primitive Soviet biplane of a kukuruznik type. Of course, I have nothing against Soviet engineering, it's just the first example that came to mind. To the first kukuruznik, whose complexity was estimated at 10, modifications were added that increased the product's complexity to 20, resulting in a biplane with significantly improved comfort, safety, and flight performance. From the design of this aircraft, two projects were developed directly from this design. These are the GPS satellite and the training satellite, achieved after hundreds of failed projects and attempts, as well as changes in the concept until reaching a complexity level at 99 and 96 respectively. The overall increase in complexity is therefore 89 and 86. For the other branches of the tree, intermediate projects were identified, such as the monoplane, the jet aircraft, the passenger plane, and the rocket. From these products, project branches emerged, leading to the creation of Starlink, an observation satellite, a space telescope, a military satellite, and a space station. Because both the technological level and economic and military competition determined a certain overall level of complexity, we will observe a general level of complexity saturation at 96 and 99, meaning a level of change from 86 to 89. In a sense, the number of changes can be associated with the time during which these changes occurred. Although these changes could have occurred in leaps, thanks to breakthrough discoveries, applied new technologies, military competition during wartime, and so on. Thus, determining a constant rate of change over time for the precise design parameters of complex satellite systems, especially over a long period, is extremely risky. Since satellite systems exhibit a similar level of complexity, the number of changes introduced from the common project, the kukuruznik, will be very similar for each system and related to complexity, rather than to evolutionary time of changes. However, evolutionists introduced the concept of a molecular clock for changes they consider random in non-coding regions of DNA or for transitions at the third position of codons, based on which they calculate branching time. I will address this topic in the following slides.